Welcome back to This is Thailand. I'm glad you're here. Now, most of the stories we tell on this channel follow a familiar shape. Man arrives, man meets woman, man loses money, man goes home. You've seen enough of them to know the beats. And look, there's a reason we keep telling those stories, because they keep happening, and because every one of them is different once you get underneath it. But today's story is a bit different, and I want to be upfront about that before we start. Today's story is about a man named Brendan. He's 65, he's from Limerick in Ireland, and he spent 40 years as a plumber. Not a romantic man, not a naive man, not, by any measure, the kind of man you'd expect to end up sitting in a coffee shop in Chiang Mai wondering how things got away from him. And that's precisely why this one's going to stay with you. Because Brendan didn't make foolish decisions. He made sensible ones, careful ones, practical ones, one after another, in a very logical sequence. One after another, in a very logical sequence. Until one day he looked at a piece of paper with some numbers on it, and understood something he wished he didn't. He's agreed to tell us what happened, in his own words, from the beginning. And I think if you're watching this before you come to Thailand, which the title suggests you are, you'll want to hear every bit of it. Here's Brendan. Right. So, I'm not great at this sort of thing, talking about myself. Never have been. My sister said I could go through a 4-hour drive and contribute 3 sentences, and she's not far wrong. But I said I'd do this, so I'll do it properly. The thing about plumbing, and bear with me here because this is relevant, I promise. The thing about plumbing is that every problem has a source. Every one. You got water going where it shouldn't or not going where it should, and your job is to find out why, not to guess, not to assume, to trace it back to where it started and fix it there, not 6 inches downstream. I was good at that. Genuinely good, 40 years, my own little outfit, the last 15 of them. 3 vans at the peak, me and 2 lads, mostly commercial work, factories, hotels, that sort of thing. Nothing glamorous. I wasn't getting on the telly, but I was good at the work and I knew it, and that's worth something. I handed the keys of the business to my nephew Kieran in October 2022. There was a small party in the yard. Sausage rolls, cans of Heineken, the lads from the council job came. Kieran made a speech that was mostly taking the mick, which was appropriate. I shook hands with everyone and drove home in my car, which was now just a car and not a work vehicle, and that distinction felt strange even then. It felt like putting down a bag you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten the weight of it. And the thing about putting down a bag like that is you don't feel lighter. You feel wrong. The first week was grand. Slept late, watched things on the television, walked the canal, thought, right, this is what people do. By the 6th week I was watching Countdown at 2 in the afternoon, and I'd like you to understand that I've never in my life watched Countdown at 2 in the afternoon. I had opinions about people who watched Countdown at 2 in the afternoon. My knees were sore, not desperate, but sore. 40 years on tile floors and concrete will do that. The damp wasn't helping. Limerick in November is not what you'd describe as a tonic. I'd walk the canal and come back with wet socks and nothing to show for it except slightly cleaner thoughts. And not always even that. I didn't ring anyone. That's an Irish thing, maybe, or maybe just a me thing. You don't ring people to say you're not managing. You wait until you are managing, and then you mention you weren't. What I did instead, and I'm not proud of this, was go on the internet at 11 o'clock at night and type something embarrassing into a search bar. I'm not going to tell you exactly what I typed. Something along the lines of, what do you do when you've no purpose? The specifics don't matter. What came up after a bit of wandering was YouTube. A video. A gray-haired fella sitting on a balcony with a beer, somewhere very warm, explaining what his life cost per month. He was retired. He was, as far as I could tell, perfectly content. And the figure he gave for his monthly expenses was less than my heating bill. I watched that video 3 times. Then I watched that video 3 times. Then I watched 6 more like it. Now I want to be honest about what I was thinking, because this matters. I wasn't sitting there thinking, oh, a warm country, how romantic. I wasn't thinking about beaches or adventure or any of that. I was thinking, that is a logistical solution to a logistical problem. I have time, I don't know what to do with. I have money, I'm not spending. I have knees that prefer warmth to damp. There is, apparently, a place where things are cheap. It doesn't rain sideways in February, and a man can sit in the sun without it costing him. That's as far as my thinking went, hand on heart. I started researching. Properly with a spreadsheet, don't laugh. I'd kept a spreadsheet for job quotes for 30 years. It's just how my brain works. Looked at Phuket, Hua Hin, Chiang Mai, cost of rent, visa requirements, healthcare. I'd read enough to know about Pattaya, and I decided Pattaya wasn't for me. I'm not judging anyone, it's just, I read about it and I thought, that's not the problem I'm trying to solve. Chiang Mai came out ahead. Cooler than the south. Quieter. No beach scene, which one associated, from what I'd read, with a different category of trouble. A city where people seem to actually live rather than just pass through. I booked a 1-month apartment in January 2023. Told myself it was a trial. Told my sister I was having a bit of a holiday. She looked at me the way she's been looking at me since 1987, like she knows more than she's saying, which she usually does. I landed in Chiang Mai on a Tuesday in February. The heat hit me coming out of the terminal. Not brutally, it was northern Thailand in winter, so the worst of it was still months away, but even then it was 26 degrees, and the air had a weight to it that Irish air doesn't. Thick and warm and smelling of something I couldn't name. Exhaust fumes and something floral underneath. The taxi had a spirit house on the dashboard, little orange flowers in front of it. I didn't know what it was at the time. I'd learn later. I was 64 years old, retired 6 months, and I'd never once in my adult life gone somewhere without a job to do when I arrived. I told myself I was being sensible. I'd like to pause here and say something to anyone watching who's thinking about making a similar move. I was sensible, in most of the ways you can measure sensible. I had money. I had done my research. I had avoided the obvious traps. None of that is the same as being prepared. The apartment was on a side street off Niman Heman Road, Niman, everyone calls it. 7th floor clean white walls, a kitchen I'd never really use, air conditioning that worked properly, and a balcony looking out over a tangle of power lines and the rooftops of low buildings going back further than you could follow. 35,000 bought a month. That's about €900. I've been paying more than that for my terraced house in Limerick, which had mold on the bathroom ceiling and a boiler that argued with me every January. I stood on that balcony the first evening with a Leo beer I'd bought from the 7-Eleven downstairs, and I did the mental arithmetic that every new arrival does. Rent, food, transport, the occasional beer. I was coming in well under what I'd budgeted. I remember thinking, and I want you to note this carefully, because it matters, I remember thinking, this is manageable. As if management was the point. As if I'd come to Thailand to manage something. The first 2 weeks, I'll be honest about, they were a bit embarrassing. I went to Doi Suthep on a Songtayu with a group of tourists, and I am not a tourist by nature, and the whole experience made me feel slightly ridiculous. I walked through the old city. I went to the night bazaar once and bought nothing and left after 20 minutes because it was loud and I didn't need anything. I went to a cooking class. A friend back home had suggested it, said it was a great way to meet people. I met a German couple on their honeymoon and a young American woman who was, she told me 3 times, finding herself. I made a perfectly adequate pad, Thai, and did not go back. What I was doing, though I wouldn't have said it this way at the time, was waiting to feel at home somewhere. And the thing about Chiang Mai is, it's actually quite good for that if you let it be. It doesn't assault you the way Bangkok does. I'd spent 1 night in Bangkok on the way in, and the BTS and the traffic and the sheer volume of everything nearly put me back on a plane. Chiang Mai is a city that has a pace to it. Monks walking in single file at dawn. Orange robes, bare feet on warm pavement, temple bells early in the morning, then roosters, then motorbikes, then the city waking up in its own unhurried way. I settled into routines. That's what I do. Always have. A routine is a structure, and a structure is something to hang a day on, and I needed that more than I was admitting to myself. Mornings, the same noodle place 2 streets over, a little open-fronted shop house with 4 plastic tables, and a woman who made boat noodles from about 6 in the morning. I don't know her name. We nodded at each other. That was sufficient. Then, a walk. Then, this became the important part. Coffee. There was a small place, maybe 10 minutes from my apartment, no sign in English that I could read, just a hand-painted board in Thai with a drawing of a cup on it, 6 tables inside and 2 out front under an awning. It wasn't a tourist place. The menu had pictures, which was the main reason I went in the first time. I ordered an Americano, and they brought it, and they didn't watch me or rush me or try to upsell me anything, and after an hour of sitting there reading the news on my phone, nobody had asked me to leave or brought me a second bill, and that was enough. I started going every morning. Now I want to be careful how I describe this, because I've thought about it a lot since, and I want to be accurate. I noticed the owner the way you notice any person who runs a place well. She was efficient, organized, the kind of person who, when something needed doing, did it without fuss, which I respect enormously. 41 years old, though I didn't know that then. Her and her sister Juan ran the place between them. Juan did most of the food prep. This woman handled everything else. She had a way of moving through the room that was purposeful without being rushed. I appreciated that. Her name was Noi, nickname. They all have them. I found out later her full name was about 6 syllables long, and Noi was just easier. Her English was better than I expected. Not perfect, but real. She'd learned it from customers and from television, she told me later. Not from a classroom, and you could tell because she had no formal phrasing at all. But she understood everything, and she made herself understood, which is more than you can say for a lot of classroom English. She didn't perform friendliness the way service people sometimes do. I'm wary of that. You can tell the difference between someone being professionally warm and someone who's just themselves. She was just themselves. She was just herself. A bit dry. Answered questions directly. Didn't ask questions she wasn't actually interested in the answer to. After about 3 weeks of daily coffee, she asked me what I'd done for work. I told her. She nodded in the direction of the counter and said, in a perfectly matter-of-fact way, that the tap had been dripping for a month, and the man she'd called about it had quoted her an amount that she considered optimistic. I had a look at it. Stripped thread on the body, needed a new tap altogether rather than just a washer, but there was a hardware shop, an actual proper hardware shop, one of those glorious, chaotic places with everything hanging from the ceiling, and the fella behind the counter who knows exactly where the one specific thing you need is, about 3 minutes walk away. I'd clocked it on one of my first walks and made a mental note the way you always do with hardware shops. I went and came back and fixed it in 11 minutes. She brought me a coffee and said thank you in a way that sounded like a statement of fact rather than a performance. I came back the next morning. She remembered my order. And look, I know what you're thinking. I know how this sounds from where you're sitting. But I want you to understand something. And I mean this genuinely. I was not pursuing anything. I was 64 years old. I'd had one serious relationship in my life that had ended quietly and without drama about 15 years prior. And I was not the type of man who arrives in a new country and starts looking for a woman. That's not who I am. I know who I am. I was just having a nice time being known somewhere. Having a coffee made by someone who knew how I took it. Being somewhere that felt, gradually, like a place I went rather than a place I happened to be. That took about 6 weeks. By the end of February, I had my noodle place, my coffee place, my morning walk, my evening walk past the moat around the old city. My knees felt better. The pension was covering my rent and food with room to spare. The savings were sitting untouched in an account in Limerick. I extended the apartment booking for another 2 months. Then another 2 after that. I told my sister I was finding it grand. She said she was glad to hear it, and asked was I eating properly. I said yes. She said good. Neither of us are great conversationalists. It runs in the family. What I didn't tell her, what I hadn't fully told myself yet, was that the morning coffee was the part of the day I looked forward to. Specifically the morning coffee. Specifically at that place. Specifically at that place. Specifically with that particular bit of uncomplicated company. I think about that now. The thing I should have looked at more carefully wasn't Noi. It was myself. I was a man who'd defined himself by his usefulness for 40 years and had just had that taken away. And I'd arrived in Chiang Mai and found something that made me feel like myself again. Fixing the tap had done that in 11 minutes more effectively than 6 months of walking a canal path in the rain. A sensible man would have taken note of that, would have said, right, be careful here, you're not in a position to be making decisions about people from a place of that kind of need. I was sensible about everything except that, so there it was. The tap was fixed. She knew my coffee order. And I had, without any intention, without any plan, made myself a regular somewhere in a city I'd only been in 3 weeks. I want to dwell on that period a bit, the months from late February through to May, because I think it's where the actual story starts, even if nothing dramatic happened. Nothing did happen, that's almost the point. I go in around 8:30 most mornings. She'd have the Americano on before I sat down by about the 3rd week. I'd read the news on my phone or just watched the street. The coffee shop faced a small lane and you'd get the whole morning parade going past. A monk from the Wat around the corner, always the same one, young lad, couldn't have been more than 20, walking with this very deliberate calm that I found oddly settling to watch. A woman selling mooping from a cart, pork skewers on a little charcoal grill, the smell of them drifting in with the petrol fumes, school kids on the back of motorbikes, the city doing its thing. Noi would come and go. She wasn't hovering. That was one of the things I kept noticing. She didn't hover. She had the place to run, and she ran it. And if I was there having my coffee, that was fine. And if I wanted to talk, that was also fine. And if I didn't, that was equally fine. No performance of hospitality. Just accommodation. I found it restful. We talked more as the weeks went on. Not every morning, not long conversations, just accumulating information about each other the way you do when you're somewhere regularly. She knew I was from Ireland, which she'd heard of but couldn't quite place geographically until I said it was next to England, and then she said, "Ah," and nodded. I knew she was from Chiang Rai originally, moved to Chiang Mai 12 years ago, had been running the shop for 7, divorced, no children. Her sister Juan was younger by 4 years and had a son who came in after school sometimes and sat in the corner doing homework. The ex-husband came up once and she dealt with it in about 2 sentences. Married young, wrong match, finished. She didn't elaborate and I didn't ask. I respected that. Some people want you to ask about things like that, and some people want you to ask about things like that, and some people are just telling you a fact. She asked me questions that were actually curious rather than polite. Wanted to know how plumbing worked, in a general sense, not the technical details, but the business of it. How you get jobs, how you price them, how you know you're not being taken advantage of by suppliers. Practical questions. She ran a small business herself, and the questions were the questions of someone who thinks in those terms. I found that I could talk about it with some animation, which surprised me slightly, because I hadn't been particularly animated about anything for the better part of a year. Somewhere in March, I couldn't tell you exactly when, I realized that I'd stopped counting the days until my apartment extension ran out. I'd stopped doing the mental arithmetic about whether I was spending sensibly. I was just there, in a place, going about days that had a shape to them. I did a few small jobs around the coffee shop over those months. Nothing she asked me to do, nothing formal. A shelf bracket that was pulling out of the wall. A fluorescent tube that needed replacing. Once I noticed the drain at the back was running slow and I sorted it without mentioning it to her, just got on with it, and she came back from the storeroom and looked at it and then looked at me and said thank you in that same factual way. I want to be honest about something here, for anyone watching who's in a similar position or thinking about being in one. I wasn't doing these things to impress her. I wasn't doing them to create obligation or to make myself indispensable. I'm fairly certain of that. I was doing them because I'm a plumber and a slow drain offends me on a professional level, and because doing something useful with my hands for even 20 minutes made me feel like myself in a way that nothing else in my day quite managed. But here's the thing, the reason doesn't actually matter. The effect is the same regardless of the reason. You do things for someone, they accumulate. She saw who I was very clearly, I think, from very early on. She saw a man who fixed things, who showed up, who didn't make a fuss, who had resources and didn't wave them around, but also clearly wasn't worried about money. And she was a woman with a business and a family and obligations stretching in several directions at once. And she needed, not in a scheming way, I want to be clear about this, she needed someone like that in her orbit. Whether what happened next was calculated from the start or whether it just developed naturally because of what we both were, I genuinely cannot tell you. I've turned it over enough times. I'm not sure it matters, in the end. The outcome would have been the same either way. What I can tell you is that by May we were talking most mornings for at least 20 minutes. I knew about her mother in Chiang Rai, older woman, some health difficulties that Noi managed from a distance and clearly worried about. I knew the shop had good months and tight months, and that the margin on coffee is not what people think it is. She knew I had savings, though not how much. She knew I had a pension coming in monthly that covered my costs here comfortably. I'd mentioned it in the context of explaining why I wasn't looking for work. Why I wasn't looking for work. Why I was here by choice rather than necessity. I think about that conversation now, not with bitterness, just, I think about it. The specific moment when the shape of my financial situation became clear to her. I'm not saying she pulled out a notebook. I'm just saying information like that, once it's in the room, stays in the room. It changes the geometry of things, even if nobody acknowledges it. In May, she asked if I'd like to come to a market on Saturday, out near the old city walls. A food market, she said, one of the better ones. She was going anyway to look at a new coffee supplier. I said yes, just like that, didn't think about it. It wasn't a date. I want to be clear that neither of us framed it that way. We walked around the market for 2 hours. She tasted about 15 different coffees and made notes on her phone. I ate a bowl of khao swa that was the best thing I'd had since arriving in Thailand. We took a Song Nai Yu back and she got off 2 stops before me. But it was the first time I'd spent time with another person in Chiang Mai that felt comfortable, not managed. Not the polite company of other expats at some bar, comparing visa costs and complaining about the heat. Just 2 people who got on, walking around a market. I came into the coffee shop the next Monday and she had the Americano ready and she didn't mention Saturday and neither did I. But I thought about it more than I should have. And that, if I'm being straight with you, is where the thing I should have watched more carefully actually began. Not the tap, not even the market. The thinking about it afterwards, on my own, in my apartment, working out whether it had been something or nothing. A sensible man, at that point, should have asked himself a harder question than the one he was asking. I was asking, does she like me? I should have been asking, what do I actually want from this, and am I in a state to want it clearly? Didn't ask that one. Filed it away somewhere. Went for coffee the next morning. By June, we'd been for that market twice more. Still not a date. Never discussed as anything. Just two people who got on, going somewhere on a Saturday morning. I'm aware of how that sounds. I was aware of it at the time, too, in a background sort of way, the way you're aware of a noise in the pipes that isn't quite loud enough to call a problem yet. June in Chiang Mai is the start of the wet season. It doesn't rain the way Ireland rains. It doesn't seep and drizzle and get into your bones. It rains decisively, heavily, for an hour or two in the afternoon, and then it stops and the air smells clean and the evening is actually pleasant. I'd adjusted to the heat by then. The knees were noticeably better. I'd stopped doing the daily euro to baht conversion in my head for every transaction, which I took as a sign that I'd settled. I was helping out at the coffee shop most mornings now. Still not asked to, still not paid, still telling myself I was just keeping busy. I'd sourced a replacement part for the espresso machine in June, a small thing, a group head seal. But the machine had been running badly, and it was driving me quietly mad watching Noi compensate for it. I'd found a supplier online, ordered the part, fitted it one morning before opening. She'd tested it and looked at me and said the coffee was better. That was the full extent of the acknowledgement. It was sufficient. I want to pause and say something here that I think is genuinely important for anyone watching. There is a version of what I was doing that looks, from the outside, like a man being taken advantage of. And there is another version that looks like a man making his own choices freely. The truth, I think, is that both are true simultaneously. Nobody asked me to fix the espresso machine. Nobody asked me to source the part. One did it because I wanted to, because I liked having something to do with my hands, because being useful in that small daily way was doing something for me that I hadn't found any other way to replicate. That's on me. That's entirely on me. But it also meant that by the time the first real financial request arrived, in late July, I had already spent 5 months building a picture of myself in my own head as someone invested in that place. Someone with a stake in it, even without a formal stake. You follow me? The mother's scan. That was the first one. Noi mentioned it on a Thursday morning, not dramatically, just in the course of talking. Her mother in Chiang Rai had been having some dizziness. The doctor was recommending an MRI. The cost at the private hospital was 15,000 baht. She wasn't asking. She was telling me about her week. I asked how much. She said 15,000 baht, that's about €390. And I said, without any pause, without any deliberation, I'll sort that. She looked at me for a moment, and then said thank you. That was it. I want you to understand my reasoning because it seemed sound to me at the time. 15,000 baht was not a significant amount relative to my situation. I was spending roughly 50,000 baht a month all in. The apartment, food, the occasional beer, transport, and my pension alone was covering that with a few thousand to spare before touching any savings. 15,000 baht was 4 days of living expenses, and it was a genuine medical need for an elderly woman. I'd have done the same for a neighbor back in Limerick if they were short for something like that. That's just, I was raised Catholic in Ireland. You help people when they need help and you don't make a performance of it. What I didn't do, and I'm flagging this specifically for anyone in a similar position, was examine whether the relationship had reached a point where that kind of help was appropriate. I'd known this woman 5 months. We'd been to a market together 3 times. Neither of us had said a word about what we were to each other. And I was contributing to her mother's medical costs. I didn't write it down. She didn't mention repayment. I didn't bring it up either. The fridge was August. The commercial refrigeration unit behind the counter, a big glass-fronted display thing, packed in on a Tuesday afternoon. It had been running warm for a week and I'd noticed it and thought about saying something and hadn't. Another moment I think about. Anyway, it failed completely, the compressor gone, and the cost of repair was going to exceed the cost of replacement. Noi looked up suppliers and found what she needed at a commercial kitchen equipment place out on the Hang Dong Road, south of the city. She didn't ask me to come. I offered to drive. I'd hired a car by then, found it easier than Songthieu's for anything outside the immediate area, and she said yes. This is where it gets specific, and I want to be specific because the specifics matter. We drove out together. Spent about 2 hours at the supplier looking at units, comparing specs. I enjoyed this, genuinely. It's basically the same as sourcing commercial kit back home. And I knew what questions to ask about compressor efficiency and service contracts. She negotiated the price, which she was good at. The unit we chose was 82,000 baht installed. About €2,100. She said she had 60,000 and could cover the rest in 2 weeks. I said I'd cover the gap. 60,000 baht, that's about €1,500. I said I'd cover the gap. Again, without real deliberation, she said, I'll pay you back in a month. I said fine. I thought about getting it in writing. I mentioned it, I said, should we sort something out on paper just so it's clear? And she looked uncomfortable. Not defensive, not angry. Just uncomfortable. Like I'd said something. A bit graceless. And I knew enough about Thai culture by then to have come across the concept of krang jai. The reluctance to cause discomfort. The way that directness can feel like aggression even when it isn't. So I dropped it. I think about that moment. The paperwork moment. I knew, in some abstract way, that I'd just passed a threshold I shouldn't have. But knowing a thing in the abstract and acting on it when you're sitting in a car park in the heat with someone you've spent 5 months building a comfortable life around, those are different things. She never paid back the 60,000 baht. Not explicitly, not in cash. It just became part of the furniture of the situation, the way these things do. By September, something had shifted between us without either of us naming it. She contacted me online most days, the messaging app everyone uses here, not WhatsApp. Small things. A photo of a new coffee she was trying. A question about a pipe fitting at her sister's house. Once, late on a Saturday evening, just a message saying that it had been a long week. I replied that yes, those happen. She sent back a single emoji, which is, I suspect, as close to vulnerability as Noi gets. We went to Doi Suthep in September. A proper trip, her idea, taking Juan's son along. The temple is up in the hills above the city. You drive up a winding road, and then there are a few hundred steps, and at the top it's all gold and bells and incense, and the whole city spread out below you in the haze. I'm not a religious man, but I'm not immune to a place being genuinely impressive. On the way back, sitting in traffic on the mountain road, she said something I've turned over many times. She said that she liked that I was someone who did things rather than talking about them. I said that talking about things had never struck me as very efficient. She laughed. It was a good moment. I was, by this point, happier than I'd been since October 2020. I don't say that lightly. I wasn't happy in the way films suggest, not giddy, not transformed. Just settled, purposeful. Like a man with a reason to get up that wasn't just a list of ways to fill a day. I have a lot of patience, looking back, for the version of myself that didn't ask harder questions at this point. He was doing the best he could with what he understood. But the problem with being happy is that it makes you want to protect the conditions that are making you happy. And protecting those conditions can look, from very close up, like wisdom, when what it actually is avoidance. The 60,000 baht was still sitting unacknowledged between us when October arrived, and something considerably larger came through the door. The brother's name was Sumshai. I mention it because he becomes important, in a way, even though I never met him. He was 37. Noi's younger brother, and their father had died 3 years earlier and left a small plot of land outside Chiang Rai. Agricultural land. A few rai, not much, but it was the father's land, and that meant something. Noi explained it to me across the counter one morning in early October, matter-of-factly, the way she explained most things. Sumshai had taken a loan against the land about 18 months prior. Business venture of some kind, she was vague about the details, and I didn't press. The business hadn't worked. The loan was with a private lender, not a bank, which I gathered was not ideal. The lender was now moving to recover the land. The amount needed to clear the debt and stop that happening was 180,000 baht. That's about €4,700. I want to walk you through my reasoning very carefully here, because I think it's the most instructive part of the whole story. Every step of it made sense to me. That's the thing I need you to understand. First, I knew foreigners can't own land in Thailand. I'd read enough to know that. The rules are clear. Land ownership is restricted to Thai nationals. So I wasn't being asked to put my name on anything, wasn't being asked to take any legal stake. I was lending money to Noi personally, a private loan between two people who knew each other. That seemed manageable. Second, I'd been in Chiang Mai 8 months. I knew Noi well enough, I thought, to have a reasonable read on who she was. She wasn't a dramatic person. She didn't exaggerate. The situation she was describing, family land, deceased father, younger brother who'd made a bad decision, sounded entirely plausible. Because it was plausible. That's the thing about a story that's mostly true. It has the texture of truth, because most of it is true. Third, 180,000 baht was not going to break me. I had savings in Limerick that I hadn't touched in 8 months. The pension was covering my monthly costs. This was a significant amount, but not a catastrophic one. I considered it a loan. I expected genuinely to be repaid. So I said yes. I transferred the money in 2 installments over a week. No paperwork, no written agreement. Just a conversation in which she said she would pay me back when the coffee shop had a better few months, and I said that was fine. I knew at this point that I should get something in writing, not because I didn't trust her, or rather, not only because of that, but because I am a man who has run a business, and a business runs on written records. I knew this, but I also knew what had happened when I'd mentioned paperwork with the fridge, and I'd read more about Thai social dynamics since then, and I'd convinced myself that pressing for a formal loan agreement would be indelicate. Culturally wrong-footed, not how things were done here. I'm going to tell you something now that I want you to pay attention to. That reasoning, the idea that asking for written documentation is somehow culturally insensitive, is the single most expensive thought I had in my entire year in Chiang Mai. A lawyer is not culturally insensitive. A written record of a financial transaction is not an insult. A Thai solicitor can draw up a straightforward loan agreement in an afternoon. This is a thing that exists. I know it exists now, because I asked about it after the fact. I didn't ask at the time. I decided I already understood the situation. Don't do what I did. Around this time, early November, I went to a little bar near the Tia Fe Gate a couple of evenings a week. Nothing special. An open-fronted place with plastic chairs and a television showing football, frequented mainly by older expats sitting with their Chang beers and a general air of having reached conclusions about things. Not my crowd, really, but it was a decent pint, and I could watch the Premier League without paying through the nose for it. There was a man there, Scottish fella, maybe 68, retired teacher, had been in Chiang Mai 4 years. We'd had a few brief conversations. He was opinionated in the way that men with too much time become opinionated, and I'd been taking his observations with a moderate quantity of salt. One evening in November he asked me, without preamble, whether I was involved with anyone local. I said I had a friend, yes, someone I knew through a coffee shop. He nodded and said he'd ask me one question and then dropped the subject. He asked whether I'd been asked for money yet, or whether I'd given money that wasn't asked for, which he said was the same thing, only more expensive. I told him it was more complicated than that. He said it always was. He told me there was something he called the family request pattern. Starts small, stays logical, escalates in stages, and by the time you're uncomfortable, the emotional cost of leaving feels higher than the financial cost of staying. He said he'd watched it happen to 3 men he knew personally in 4 years. He told me I should read up on Thai inheritance law and land disputes before I did anything I couldn't undo. I thanked him, finished my beer, and went home. I thought about what he'd said for about 2 days. Then I filed it away in the same place I'd filed the paperwork thought and the Krangjai thought and all the other thoughts I'd had, and then decided not to act on. Perspective 1, told myself he was a bitter man who'd generalized badly from a few experiences, and that my situation was different because Noi wasn't a bar girl, because I hadn't met her in any of the contexts these stories usually feature, because she was a small business owner with a practical mind and a genuine family problem that happened to require temporary financial assistance. I was not in Pattaya. This was not that. The guest house idea came up in December. Noi's idea, her proposal, though she presented it in that understated way she had, mentioned it once almost in passing, let it sit for a week, mentioned it again. The ground floor of the building had a storage space that was being underused. 4 rooms was the plan. Not a hotel, just simple accommodation for tourists, backpackers, people coming through Chiang Mai who wanted something cleaner than a hostel but cheaper than a proper hotel. Plenty of those passing through, and Niman was well located. She said she needed 320,000 baht, about €8,300, for the renovation. Building materials, a contractor she trusted, furniture, bathrooms. She showed me a breakdown. It was a real breakdown, itemized, and the numbers were in the right range for what she was describing. I know, because I priced it myself against what I knew from sourcing materials. And here was the key thing, the thing that settled it in my mind. I would manage the maintenance side, the repairs, the sourcing. I'd be useful. Not just a source of money, a working part of the operation. That felt different to me. That felt like a partnership rather than a subsidy. We talked about it in 4 separate conversations across December, which I took as evidence that it was considered and deliberate rather than impulsive. We talked in general terms about the future, nothing pinned down, nothing formal, but marriage was mentioned twice. Both times in that vague future tense way where neither person is quite committing, like two people standing near a door without either reaching for the handle. I did not contact a solicitor. I told myself this was because Thai property law was complicated for foreigners, and any formal agreement would be legally questionable anyway, which I'd read something about somewhere. I did not verify this with an actual lawyer. I just decided it was true and acted accordingly. The 320,000 baht went across in January 2024 in 3 transfers. By February, I was 1 year in Chiang Mai. My retirement visa renewal had gone smoothly. I put 800,000 baht in a Bangkok bank account for the purpose, which is the requirement, and the immigration office on the Hangdong Road had processed it without drama. My savings in Limerick were still largely intact. I'd spent about €15,500 in total between the 4 stages, the mother's scan, the fridge, the land, the renovation, and I had not a single piece of paper documenting any of it. The renovation was underway. There were 3 workers in the ground floor space with dust and the smell of fresh concrete and the sound of tiling that started at 7 every morning and stopped at 5. I was sourcing bathroom fittings, going back and forth to a wholesale plumbing supplier on the superhighway. I knew the names of the foreman and 2 of the workers. I was showing up every day. I was, in a word that I keep coming back to, useful. That felt, I want to be completely honest with you, like enough. It felt like sufficient reason to be where I was, doing what I was doing, with the financial commitments I'd made. I was 64 years old, I had a pension and savings and somewhere to be every morning, and for the first time in 14 months I didn't feel like a man waiting for a day to end. The problem with feeling like enough is that it stops you looking at the numbers. The guest house opened in February with 2 rooms finished. The other 2 were another 6 weeks away, Noy said. The Tyler had taken on another job and the schedule had slipped. Fine, these things happen in construction. I knew that better than most. The first bookings came through a Thai accommodation app and one listing on a booking website Juan had set up. Nothing spectacular. Room 1 had a couple from Germany for 4 nights. Room 2 had a young Thai woman who was in Chiang Mai for a training course with her employer. Both seemed satisfied. The Germans asked me one morning how long we'd been operating, and I said we'd just opened, which was true, and they said it was very clean, which I took as a reasonable start. I asked Noy at the end of the first week what the income had come to. She gave me a number verbally, I don't remember it exactly, something around 9,000 baht. I nodded. Seemed plausible for 2 rooms at partial occupancy. I wrote it down that evening, not because I was suspicious, just habit. 40 years of job quotes and supplier invoices, you write things down. I opened a new notebook, I'd been using them since before smartphones, never fully switched over, and started a simple record. Date. Rooms occupied, rate per night. Income in, expenses noted. The way I'd have tracked any job. The first inconsistency appeared in week 3, and I want to be precise about this because the way it appeared matters. I'd been to the wholesale plumbing supplier on the superhighway to pick up showerhead fittings for room 3, which was coming along. While I was there, I asked about the price of the floor tiles we'd used in the bathrooms. I was curious whether we'd got a fair rate from the contractor. The supplier quoted me a figure per square meter. I did the maths in my head, applied it to the area I'd seen tiled. The number was about 12,000 baht less than the receipt Noy had shown me. Now, 12,000 baht is about €300. That's not nothing, but it's also not enormous. Prices vary. Contractors have their own supplier relationships. I didn't immediately conclude anything, I just noted it. The second thing was the occupancy figures. By the end of March, I had 6 weeks of records. The booking app showed check-in confirmations. I could see those on a shared login Noy had given me access to. The income figures she was reporting verbally were consistently about 8 to 12% lower than what the occupancy numbers would suggest at the posted rates, not every week, but most weeks, and always in the same direction. A plumber doesn't need dramatic evidence of a problem, you just need the pressure to be consistently wrong in one direction. That tells you something is going where it isn't meant to go. I didn't say anything to Noy yet. This is deliberate and I want to explain it. I didn't say anything to Noy yet. I know myself well enough to know that if I'm not sure, I don't speak. You don't accuse a joint of leaking before you've confirmed it's the joint and not the fitting 3 inches upstream. You investigate first. You speak when you know. So I investigated quietly. Over the next 3 weeks, I accumulated a few more data points. The mother's illness came up again in April. Noy mentioned that her mother had needed another appointment, Something about a follow-up from the condition that had required the MRI back in July. The province she mentioned was different. In July, she'd said the hospital was in Chiang Rai City. In April, she said her mother had been to a hospital in Phayao, which is a different province entirely, about 90 minutes further south. I noted it without reacting. Could be nothing. People go to different hospitals for different specialists. But I noted it. A cousin who had been mentioned in the context of the land situation in October, someone Noi had said was helping Sumchai manage the dispute, was referred to as an uncle in a conversation in May. Different word. Different relationship. I wasn't certain I'd remembered it right the first time, but I noted it. I asked Juan one morning, when Noi was briefly out on an errand, a fairly indirect question about how the guesthouse income was being managed. I said I was trying to understand the accounting for tax purposes. I'd been through my visa renewal, and the bank account requirement had made me think more about financial records generally. It was a reasonable cover, and it wasn't entirely untrue. Juan looked uncomfortable in the particular way that Thai people look uncomfortable when they're trying not to say something rather than trying to think of something to say. She told me to ask Noi. Then she went to the back of the shop. Juan's discomfort told me more than any answer she could have given. I sat with it for another week. I want to be clear about what I was feeling during this period, because I think it matters and it's easy to simplify. I wasn't angry. I wasn't devastated. I was doing the calculation, I suppose, working out what was actually true before I decided how I felt about it. That's just how I'm made. I also want to be honest that part of me, a fairly significant part, didn't want to be honest that part of me, a fairly significant part. Because if I was right, then a year and a half of something that had felt real and grounding and worth having was a different shape than I'd thought it was. And I was 65 years old, and I didn't particularly want to start that reckoning. But I am who I am. On a Tuesday morning in the second week of June, I waited until the coffee shop was between customers, sat down across from Noi at the corner table she used for paperwork, and put the notebook on the table between us. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just said, I've been keeping a record, and I'd like to go through it with you because some of the figures aren't matching up the way I'd expect. She looked at the notebook. She looked at me. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she started to explain. She didn't deny a single figure. That's the thing that I've turned over the most. She didn't pretend I was wrong or that I'd made an error. She explained it. Calmly and clearly, with tears starting about halfway through, but her voice staying level, she explained that her family, her mother, Sonchai, 2 aunts, Juan's ex-husband who was ill and contributing nothing to his son's upkeep, a grandmother in her 80s, 7 people in total, had been dependent on the income from the coffee shop before I arrived. The coffee shop alone had never been quite enough. She had been managing a shortfall every month for 3 years. When I came along, a man with a pension, with savings, with no dependents, who showed up every day and asked nothing for himself except company and something to do, the money I put in hadn't gone into a separate account somewhere. It had gone into the family. It had paid the grandmother's medical bills. It had helped Sumchai get back on his feet after the land situation. It had covered 2 months when the coffee shop had a bad run and the family would otherwise have been in difficulty. She said, clearly and without aggression, I did not steal from you. I used what came into the family for the family. That is what you do. She was crying. She was also not offering to repay anything. Both things were simultaneously true, and I could see that for her, they were not contradictory. I sat there for what felt like quite a long time, looking at my notebook, the thing that I hadn't been prepared for, and I suppose this is the thing that distinguishes this story from the simpler kind, was that I couldn't find it in me to tell her she was wrong, not entirely. From inside her world, from inside a set of obligations and responsibilities and cultural understandings that I had spent a year and a half living alongside without ever fully entering, what she had done had a logic to it. A man with resources had arrived. The resources had been redirected to where they were needed. This is how things work. I'm not saying I wasn't taken advantage of. I'm saying that the word advantage is doing complicated work in that sentence, and I'm not sure it captures everything that happened between us over 16 months. I picked up my notebook. I said something, I don't remember exactly what, something neutral, and I left. I walked back to my apartment on Niman, past the Spirit House outside the pharmacy with its little garlands of marigolds, past the 7-Eleven where I'd bought Leo beers on the first evening thinking this is manageable, past the lane where the monk walked every morning. The city was hot and entirely indifferent. I sat on my balcony for about an hour, and then I did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I got out a piece of paper and I need to think clearly. The accounting didn't take long. I knew the numbers already. Had been carrying them in my head for weeks. I just needed to see them written down in a column, the way I used to write up a job at the end of the day. 15,000 bought for the mother scan, 60,000 for the fridge, 180,000 for the land, 320,000 for the renovation, minus whatever I might reasonably recover from a guest house I had no legal stake in. The smaller amounts, the parts I'd sourced, the fittings I'd bought without tracking, maybe another 20,000 on top. Total, approximately 595,000 baht, 15,500 euro, give or take. I sat with that number for a while, then I checked my Irish bank account on my phone. The savings were there, untouched. The full amount, plus 16 months of pension that had been accumulating with nowhere much to go. I had not, at any point, given Noi access to that account, not because I was wise. Because I'd never gotten around to moving the money, and moving it had seemed like unnecessary effort during a period when I was content and not paying close attention to things I should have been paying attention to. There's an irony in that which is not lost on me. My laziness protected me more effectively than my judgment did. 15,500 euro, not ruinous, not a sum that was going to change my circumstances in any fundamental way. I could absorb it and continue. I knew that sitting on the balcony on a June evening with the sounds of motorbikes on Nimmen below and the distant bells of the Watt around the corner marking another hour, I booked a flight to Dublin for the following Friday. I didn't tell Noi. I didn't go back to the coffee shop. I'm not sure what I would have said if I had. My sister collected me from Dublin airport. She asked if I'd had a good time. I said yes, mostly. She said I looked thinner. I said the food was good, but I'd been moving around a lot. Neither of those things was exactly true, but I'd been moving around a lot. She made me a plate of rashers and eggs, and we watched the news and went to bed, and that was that. I stayed 3 months, September, October, November. The canal path again, the damp again. My knees, which had been fine in Thailand, started complaining about the cold somewhere in October, right on schedule. I went to see Aaron's for dinner twice and watched his kids play video games and felt, with some clarity, that this was not my life anymore either. Whatever my life was, it wasn't this. I wasn't bitter about it. It was just a fact. I thought about Noi quite a lot, more than I expected to, actually. Not with rage or longing, somewhere in between and not quite either. I thought about the conversation at the corner table and her face while she explained it, the tears and the steadiness together. I think she was telling the truth about how she understood it. I think she genuinely did not experience what she'd done as theft. And I think, and this is the uncomfortable part, the part one still turn over, she wasn't entirely wrong about the obligation. Her family was real. Their need was real. She had been carrying that weight before I arrived. She had been carrying that weight before I arrived. What she'd failed to tell me was that I was being enrolled into the carrying of it. That's the part that wasn't right, not the need itself, the enrollment without consent. In November, I found a Facebook group for expat retirees in Chiang Mai doing casual maintenance and handyman work for small hotels and guest houses. A few dozen members, older men, most of them, various trades, earning a modest cash income from the kind of work they'd done all their lives and didn't want to stop doing entirely. I wrote them a message introducing myself, my trade, my situation. I said I was considering coming back and wanted to understand whether there was work to be found. 3 of them replied within a day. 2 of them were plumbers. I booked a flight back in December, different airline, different time of day, and when I landed at Chiang Mai airport and the heat came through the terminal doors, I noticed I didn't convert the temperature in my head. It was just warm. It was just there. I'm in a different apartment now. Sangklang area, east of the old city, not Nimmen. Different neighborhood, different routines. I haven't been back to Noi's coffee shop. I don't intend to. Not out of bitterness. Or not only out of bitterness, there's a small amount of that and I won't pretend otherwise, but because there's nothing useful to be said and I'm not interested in scenes. The work is good. 2 mornings a week at a 12-room guest house on Thave Road, cash in hand, doing what I've always done, fixing the things that need fixing, sourcing the parts, keeping systems running. It's not much money. I don't need much money. What I need, and what I have, is somewhere to be, and something to do when I get there. 65 years old, and I'm still working that out. So, the 5 things. I said I'd give you the 5 things, and I will, because they're the reason I agreed to tell this story in the first place. First, no money without a written record. Not a note, not a mental tally. A document signed with an amount and a repayment timeline. A Thai solicitor can prepare this. It costs very little. It does not cause offense unless you allow yourself to believe it does, which is a choice, and you should make the other choice. Second, before any money touches anything connected to assets, land, property, business renovation, any of it, you speak to a lawyer first. A proper one. Not to complicate things. To understand what you can and cannot own, what recourse you have, what you're actually agreeing to. I did not do this. It cost me €8,300, and I have no legal standing in a guest house that exists partly because of my money. Third, understand family obligation as a system, not as individual requests. Each request will seem reasonable in isolation. That's the nature of it. But they exist within a structure, and that structure has expectations and a direction of travel, and you need to understand the whole structure before you engage with any part of it. Talk to people who've been here longer than 6 months. Ask them directly about family obligation. Listen to what they say. Fourth, keep your primary account in your home country for at least the first year, and do not give anyone access to it. Not because everyone you meet is dishonest, because you don't yet know who you've met. You need time to know that, and money sitting at a distance buys you time. Fifth, and this is the one that is most specifically mine, most specifically this story, be very careful about what you do for free in the first weeks. Be careful about what you fix, what you source, what problems you solve for someone you've just met, not because generosity is wrong, because you are announcing very clearly what you will give and what you will give it for. And once that's announced, it stays announced. The tap. That was it. That was the whole thing. I went to a hardware shop, came back, fixed a tap in 11 minutes, and showed a woman I didn't know that I was the kind of man who does that sort of thing without being asked and without expecting anything back. Everything that followed was, in some sense, a reasonable inference from that 11 minutes. That one, as I said at the start, was on me. I'm at a coffee shop right now, as it happens. Not that one. A new place, 5 minutes from the new apartment. I don't fix things here. I just sit and drink the coffee and watch the lane outside, and sometimes the same young monk goes past, or one who looks very like him, walking with that deliberate calm, and the morning gets on with being a morning. It's not nothing, it's something, in fact. I'm still working out what to call it. That's Brendan's story. And I want to sit with it for a moment before we close, because I think it deserves that. This is Thailand tells a lot of stories on this channel. Men who lost everything. Men who were deliberately targeted and systematically cleaned out. Men who were deliberately targeted and systematically cleaned out. Men who ignored every warning and paid the full price for it. Those stories are real and they matter, and we'll keep telling them. But Brendan's story is something a bit different. Brendan's story is about two people operating from two entirely different understandings of what money is for and what obligation means, colliding in a coffee shop in Chiang Mai, and neither of them fully understanding the collision until the damage was done. Noi wasn't running a scam in the way we usually mean that word. She was running a family. And those two things, it turns out, can produce almost identical outcomes for a man who doesn't know the difference going in. The losses Brendan sustained were bounded by stubbornness, by inertia, by the fact that he never got around to moving his savings. He'd call that luck, and he'd be partly right. But there's something in the way he held back, in the self-reliance that occasionally shaded into pride, that also kept the damage from being total. He lost €15,500. He kept his savings, his pension, his health, and apparently his willingness to go back. That willingness, that strikes me as worth noting. He went back. Not to fix what broke, not to recover what he lost, but because on balance, and after 3 months of canal paths and DAP, Chiang Mai was still the better answer to the problem he arrived with. If you're planning a move to Thailand, if that's why you clicked this video, Brendan's story has given you something more useful than a list of scams to avoid. It's given you a map of how a reasonable, careful person can still end up somewhere they didn't intend, and what the specific decisions were that took them there. Write that down. Not to fix where that took them there. The tap. The paperwork conversation. The Scottish fella at the bar near THAKT. The moment he decided he already understood the situation. Those are the moments. And they're avoidable. Thanks for watching. This is Thailand. If this story helped you, share it with someone who's thinking about making a similar move. And we'll see you in the next one.